The kitchen was silent, except for the rhythmic sound of water running over porcelain, a sound that shouldn't have existed at 2:47 in the morning. Nala Robertson stood frozen in the doorway of the industrial kitchen at Nutricor headquarters in Palo Alto, California, her keys still dangling from her trembling fingers. The fluorescent lights hummed their lonely tune above her, casting harsh shadows across the stainless steel surfaces she'd scrubbed clean just hours before. But it was the figure hunched over the sink, her sink, in her kitchen, that made her breath catch in her throat like a bird trapped behind her ribs. Cassian Thorne. The billionaire founder of Nutricor, the tech visionary who'd promised to revolutionize human nutrition through molecular gastronomy, the man whose face graced the covers of Forbes, Wired, and Fast Company, the boss who'd barely glanced at her in the 6 months she'd worked here. He was washing her dishes. Not just washing them, scrubbing them with the kind of desperate intensity that spoke of something deeper than cleanliness. His expensive Tom Ford shirt was soaked through, clinging to his gaunt frame. His hands, which should have been smooth and manicured like every other tech mogul she'd seen, were raw and red, moving in circles that seemed almost ritualistic. And he was crying. Silent tears tracked down his hollow cheeks as he worked, his lips moving in what looked like a prayer or a confession. The cold sting of something Nala couldn't name crept up her spine. Not fear exactly, but the profound, unsettling sensation of witnessing a powerful man's private devastation. "Mr. Thorne?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but in the cathedral silence of that kitchen, it might as well have been a gunshot. He spun around, and Nala saw his face fully for the first time in months. Gone was the confident gleam she'd seen in those corporate videos. Gone was the imperious distance he maintained with all the support staff. What remained was a hollow-eyed ghost of a man, his skin the color of old newspaper, his eyes sunken into his skull like a man who'd been starving for months. But that wasn't possible. She'd seen him in the building just last week, hadn't she? "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking like thin ice under weight. "I'm so sorry, Nala. I didn't know. I didn't understand." The weight of those words hung in the air between them, heavy, ominous, promising a truth that would change everything. Before we dive into this story, if you believe that some things in life, like tradition, love, and real human connection, can't be replaced by technology, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if this story moves you the way it moved me, drop a comment telling me about a time someone's humility changed everything. Now let's get into it. 6 months earlier. The morning had started the way most of Nala's mornings did, with her grandmother's voice echoing in her head and the scent of rich, dark earth under her fingernails. She'd been up since 4, tending the small plot behind her apartment where she grew the herbs and vegetables her grandmother had taught her to cultivate. Collard greens that tasted like memory. Tomatoes so sweet they could make you weep. Herbs her great-grandmother had brought north during the Great Migration, their seeds passed down like precious heirlooms through generations of Robertson women. At 6, she'd caught the BART train from MacArthur Station to Millbrae, then transferred to Caltrain up to Palo Alto. By 7:30, she was pushing through the gleaming glass doors of Nutricor headquarters, a building that looked more like a spaceship than a place where food was made. "Morning, Nala," Marcus called out with his usual warmth. He was one of the 3 black employees she'd encountered in the entire building, himself, Nala, and Keisha from accounting. "Morning, Marcus. How's your daughter doing with those applications?" "Got accepted to 3 schools so far. Your cooking tips for her essays really helped. She wrote about how food tells our stories." Nala smiled, feeling that familiar warm glow that came from helping others. "That's wonderful. You tell her I'm proud of her." She made her way to the basement kitchen, not the gleaming showcase kitchen on the executive floor where celebrity chefs performed for investors, but the real working kitchen where Nutricor's revolutionary meal replacement shakes were actually produced. The other staff were already there. Miguel, who handled prep, Chen, who managed inventory, and Alexis, the head of product development, who occasionally deigned to visit the basement. "Nala, thank God," Miguel said, his accent thick with relief. "Alexis is on a rampage. Apparently Cassian hated yesterday's batch, said it tasted like liquid cardboard with pretensions." Nala hung up her coat and tied on her apron, not the designer chef's whites the showcase kitchen staff wore, but a simple cotton apron her grandmother had embroidered with tiny herbs along the hem. "What does he want changed?" Nala asked, hanging her coat with another deep sigh. "That's the thing," Shen chimed in, looking up from his tablet. "He doesn't know. He just keeps saying something's missing. He's been off lately, obsessive, paranoid even." Up on the 40th floor, in an office that overlooked the sprawling Stanford campus and the San Francisco Bay beyond, Cassian Thorne was indeed spiraling. He stood at his standing desk. He'd given up his chair 3 months ago when sitting became too uncomfortable, and stared at the array of blood test results, genetic analyses, and medical reports spread across his monitors. "It's not possible," he muttered to himself, scrolling through the data again. "Not possible." His smartwatch buzzed with another alert, heart rate elevated, stress levels critical, recommend immediate rest. He'd created that algorithm himself. He'd built Nutricor on the promise that technology could replace the inefficiencies of traditional food, that molecular nutrition could be optimized beyond what nature provided. He'd raised $2 billion on that promise. He'd convinced Silicon Valley's elite that they could hack their bodies like computers, and it was all a lie. The blood work didn't lie. The genetic markers didn't lie. For 6 months, ever since Nutricor's official launch, Cassian's health had been deteriorating. Rapid weight loss, bone density decreasing, muscle wasting despite the perfectly optimized protein formulas. His hair had fallen out. His teeth had become sensitive. He was 38 years old and felt like he was aging a year every week. The irony was almost poetic. The man who promised to revolutionize nutrition was starving to death on his own product. But here was the impossible part. Last Thursday, he'd felt better. For the first time in months, he'd woken up without the crushing fatigue. His hands had been steady. His mind was clear. He'd actually felt hungry, real hunger, not the hollow emptiness that had become his constant companion.
The only variable that had changed. The previous evening, unable to sleep, he'd wandered down to the basement kitchen at 2 a.m. He'd found Nala there. She often came in early, he'd learned, preparing what she called her foundation stocks for the week's production batches. The kitchen had smelled like heaven. Not the sterile, perfectly calibrated scent of Nutricor's products, but something deeper, richer, alive. Simmering bones and vegetables, herbs he couldn't name, spices that seemed to carry stories in their smoke. Nala had been startled to see him, but had offered him a cup of the broth with the kind of grandmotherly insistence that transcended corporate hierarchy. He'd drunk it, too exhausted to refuse, expecting nothing. But that night, he'd slept. Really slept, for the first time in months. And the next day? He'd dismissed it as coincidence, placebo effect, the power of suggestion. Until his blood work came back. Every marker that had been declining had stabilized. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticeable. Enough to be real. He'd ordered more tests, convinced there'd been a lab error. But the results were consistent, which meant the impossible might be true. Something in Nala Robertson's cooking, something that wasn't in Nutricor's optimized formulas, was keeping him alive. His phone rang. Dmitry Volkov, his CTO and co-founder. "We have a problem," Dmitry said without preamble. His Russian accent was always more pronounced when he was stressed. "3 more investors have questions about the clinical trials. Reuters is asking questions about our FDA filings, and..." He paused. "Senator Morrison's aide called. His wife has been on Nutricor exclusively for 2 months and is showing signs of malnutrition." Cassian closed his eyes. Senator Morrison was their biggest political ally, the man championing legislation that would allow Nutricor to replace school lunches nationwide. How bad? "Her doctor is recommending she stop immediately. If this becomes public, the backlash will be severe. The company will be finished." "Fix it," Cassian said automatically. "Bury it. Pay them. Whatever it takes. There's more. The FDA wants access to our real production data, not the sanitized version we've been showing them, the actual nutrient analyses from the past 6 months." Cassian's blood ran cold. Those analyses would show what he'd discovered 3 weeks ago. Nutricor's products were nutritionally incomplete, missing essential compounds that couldn't be synthesized, lacking the complex micronutrients that only came from real food prepared in traditional ways. They'd been selling snake oil, premium billion-dollar snake oil. "Delay them," Cassian said. "I need time." "Time for what?" to figure out why Nala Robertson's cooking was saving his life while his own company's product was killing him. Just give me 2 weeks. He hung up and turned back to his screens, pulled up the basement kitchen's security footage, started watching Nala work. She moved through the kitchen like a dancer, like a priestess performing a sacred ritual. Every ingredient was selected with intention, every motion was purposeful. She tasted constantly, adjusting with pinches and dashes that no algorithm could quantify. And she talked to the food. He turned up the audio. "That's it, baby," she murmured to a pot of simmering greens. "You just take your time. Let all that goodness come out." It was absurd. It was unscientific. It was exactly the kind of primitive, inefficient methodology Nutricore was supposed to eliminate. And somehow, impossibly, it was working. The emergency board meeting was called for Monday morning. Cassian stood at the head of the table in the glass-walled conference room, facing 8 of the most powerful venture capitalists and business minds in Silicon Valley. These were the people who'd believed in his vision, who'd invested hundreds of millions into Nutricore. They were also the people who would destroy him if they knew the truth. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Thank you for coming on short notice. I wanted to address the concerns that have been circulating." "Cut the bullshit, Cassian." Victoria Chen, the Dragon Lady of Sand Hill Road, fixed him with her legendary stare. "Your CTO has been making strange requests. Your legal team is suddenly very interested in product liability insurance, and I've heard whispers, just whispers, mind you, that some of your consumers are experiencing health issues." "Whispers are not data," Cassian countered. "Then show us the data," demanded Robert Fairchild III, old money from Boston who've invested purely because Nutricore promised to disrupt the primitive food industry. The irony of that phrase, feeding us, was not lost on Cassian. "I'm working on comprehensive documentation." "You've been saying that for 3 months." Victoria leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails clicking on the glass table. "Here's what I think is happening. I think you've discovered your product doesn't work as promised. I think you're scrambling to fix it before the FDA shuts you down, and I think you're stalling." The room went silent. In Silicon Valley, there were 2 kinds of failures, the kind you pivoted from and the kind you went to prison for. Victoria was suggesting Cassian was headed for the latter. "Give me 6 weeks, Cassian said, hating the desperation in his voice. 6 weeks to optimize the formula. I know what's missing. I just need time to synthesize it." What he didn't tell them, he'd been trying to synthesize it for 2 months. Every attempt failed. Whatever made Nala's cooking work, whatever compound or combination of compounds was keeping him alive, couldn't be replicated in a lab. 4 weeks, Victoria said flatly. "And Cassian, if you're lying to us, if you've been committing fraud, well, you know what happens to liars in this industry." He knew. Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos, prison. After they filed out, Dmitri stayed behind. "You have a plan?" Dmitri asked quietly. "I need to study her, Nala Robertson. Everything. Every ingredient, every technique, every what, Cassian? Her magic words? This is insane. We are scientists. We don't believe in—"
"I've run the numbers 20 times. Cassian's voice rose, cracking. "The only variable that correlates with my improvement is her cooking, her specific preparations, something she does that we're not capturing in our processes. Then hire her as a consultant. Bring her up to R&D. Pick her brain properly." Cassian shook his head. "She won't talk. I've tried. She clams up when anyone from upstairs asks about her methods, says her grandmother taught her and it's not about measurements or recipes. Says," he laughed bitterly, "says food is about love and intention, that you can't optimize it. Hippie nonsense." "Maybe, or maybe." Cassian pulled up a study on his tablet. "Look at this. Research on the human microbiome. Fermented foods, traditional preparation methods. There's evidence that cooking processes passed down through generations create bacterial cultures we're only beginning to understand. Enzymes, probiotics, things that can't be synthesized because they're alive." Dmitri read, his expression shifting from skeptical to thoughtful. "So you think her traditional methods are producing some kind of beneficial bacteria? Or enzymes? Or some combination of compounds we haven't identified? All I know is her food is keeping me alive, and our product is killing people. Then we reverse engineer it. Take samples, run gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, whole genome sequencing if we have to. I've been doing that for 3 weeks. Every analysis shows the same baseline nutrients we're already including. Whatever makes it work isn't showing up in conventional testing. Dmitri was quiet for a long moment. You know what you're suggesting is impossible. That food could have some ineffable quality. That traditional cooking could be superior to our optimized processes. If that's true, our entire company is based on a false premise. I know. So what do you want to do? Cassian stared out at the bay, at the sailboats dotting the water, at the world he'd been so sure he could improve with algorithms and optimization. I want to watch her. Really watch her. See what she does when she thinks no one's looking. That's creepy, my friend. I'm dying, Dmitri. I'm 38 years old and I'm dying because I was too arrogant to believe that maybe, just maybe, there are some things technology can't improve upon. That evening, Cassian initiated what he grimly thought of as Operation Survival. He had Nutricor's head of operations, a woman named Stephanie Carr with ice blue eyes and colder ambitions, call Nala up to the 40th floor. Nala came up in the service elevator, still in her kitchen clothes, smelling like herbs and smoke. She stood in Stephanie's pristine office, looking around at the minimalist decor with barely concealed discomfort. "Ms. Robertson," Stephanie began, her smile sharp as wire, "thank you for coming up. We wanted to discuss your performance." Nala's expression didn't change, but Cassian, watching via video feed from his office next door, saw her hands clasped together, a defensive gesture. "Is there a problem with my work, ma'am?" "Ma'am," Stephanie repeated, her smile widening in a way that made Cassian's stomach turn. "How quaint, how very traditional. But no, your work is fine, adequate. However, we've been reviewing efficiency metrics across all departments, and your production times are significantly slower than industry standard." "I don't understand, ma'am." Nala caught herself. "I complete all assigned batches on schedule. The products pass quality control." "On schedule, yes, but you take twice as long as our algorithmic projections suggest necessary. Time is money, Ms. Robertson, and frankly, we need to know, why so slow?" Cassian watched Nala's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, some processes can't be rushed. The stocks need time to simmer properly. The flavors need to develop. If you rush it, you lose flavors." Stephanie laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Ms. Robertson, our products are nutritionally optimized meal replacements. We're not running a soul food restaurant here." The slur was subtle but unmistakable. Cassian saw Nala flinch. "What I make still needs to taste good," Nala said quietly, "and it needs to be made right. My grandmother always said—" "Your grandmother," Stephanie interrupted, "didn't have shareholders to answer to, didn't have efficiency quotas or profit margins. This is a modern company, and we need staff who understand modern expectations." "Are you firing me?" "Not yet. Consider this a warning. Speed up your processes or we'll find someone who can. We've been looking at automation options, AI-controlled cooking systems that could replace most of your department. But Mr. Thorne has been reluctant for now." After Nala left, her face carefully neutral but her hands shaking as she pressed the elevator button, Stephanie walked into Cassian's office. "That should motivate her," she said, satisfied. "Fear is an excellent performance enhancer." "That was cruel," Cassian said quietly. "That was efficient. You wanted her rattled so she'd make mistakes, be less guarded, so you could study her methods without her being self-conscious, right?" She was right, of course. That had been the plan. But watching Nala's face as Stephanie had casually dismissed her grandmother's wisdom, had reduced generations of knowledge to inefficiency. "Just get me the data," he said, hating himself. But it got worse. Over the next 2 weeks, Stephanie implemented what she called performance optimization protocols in the basement kitchen. Cameras in every corner, timers on every process, automated alerts when Nala spent too long on any single task. Miguel was reassigned. Chen was moved to a different shift. Nala was increasingly isolated, working alone with her traditional methods, while the rest of Nutricor moved toward full automation. And Cassian watched all of it, documenting every herb she used, every technique, every moment of care she put into food that was destined to be processed into shakes that barely resembled cooking at all. He told himself he'd make it right,
Once he figured out her secret, once he synthesized whatever compound was saving his life, he'd give her credit, he'd compensate her, he'd make her a consultant, pay her a fortune. But first, he had to survive. And that meant reducing this kind, brilliant woman to a laboratory subject. He'd spent his whole career believing the ends justified the means, that optimization and efficiency were virtues above all else, that traditional methods were merely obstacles to progress. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The night everything fell apart started like any other. Nala stayed late, as she'd been doing more frequently. The kitchen was her sanctuary, the one place in this cold building where she felt connected to something real, to her grandmother, to her history, to herself. She was making what her grandmother called healing broth, the same one she'd served Cassian months ago. Organic chicken bones from a farmer's market in Oakland, vegetables from her garden, herbs she'd grown from seeds her grandmother had given her before she passed. She added them slowly, reverently, whispered the prayers her grandmother had taught her, prayers of gratitude, of intention, of love poured into every ingredient. Thank you for nourishing us. Thank you for sustaining us. May everyone who eats of this food feel loved and cherished. Ridiculous, maybe, in a tech company kitchen, but her grandmother had taught her that food was more than fuel. It was connection. It was memory. It was love made tangible. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the door open behind her, didn't sense him until she turned to get more herbs from the cooler. Cassian Thorne stood in the doorway, but this wasn't the put-together CEO from the conference rooms. This was a ghost. He'd lost at least 30 pounds since she'd first seen him. His expensive clothes hung off his frame. His skin had a translucent quality, like paper held up to light. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. They were desperate, haunted. The eyes of a man who'd seen his own mortality and found it wanting. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Nala." "Mr. Thorne, you shouldn't be down here at this hour. The building protocols." "I'm dying." He said it simply, matter-of-factly. "I've been dying for months, and the only thing keeping me alive is your cooking." Nala stared at him, ladle still in her hand, broth dripping back into the pot in rhythmic drops that counted out the seconds of shocked silence. "That's not possible," she finally said. "I thought so too. I've run every test, every analysis, but the data doesn't lie." He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, showed her graphs and charts she didn't understand. "Every time I consume something you've made, not the processed shakes, but the foundation broths, the stocks you make before they're processed, my health markers improve. When I don't, they decline." "But I just cook regular food, the same way my grandmother taught me. There's nothing special." "That's where you're wrong." He took a step closer, and Nala saw tears tracking down his hollow cheeks. "There's special everything about it. The traditional methods, the live cultures and your fermented ingredients, the herbs from your garden that have adapted to your local soil microbiome, the time you take that allows complex enzymatic processes to occur. It's all special. It's all irreplaceable." He laughed, a broken sound. "I built a billion-dollar company on the premise that I could optimize food, that I could improve on millions of years of tradition and evolution, and I was wrong. God, I was so wrong." Nala set down her ladle carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need your help. Because without it, I'm going to die. And because my company's product is hurting people, not killing them, not yet, but causing deficiencies, malnutrition. The FDA is investigating. In 4 weeks, they're going to shut us down unless I can prove Nutricor's products are safe." "Then make them safe." "I can't." The outburst echoed in the kitchen. "Don't you understand? I've been trying for months. I can't synthesize what you create. I can't replicate it in a lab. Whatever makes your food work, whatever combination of living cultures and traditional techniques, and whatever ineffable quality comes from cooking with intention and love, I can't bottle it. I can't mass produce it. I can't optimize it." He sank against the counter, and for a moment, Nala thought he might collapse. "Mr. Thorne, you need to see a doctor. I've seen 20 doctors. They all say the same thing. My body is malnourished despite consuming what should be perfectly adequate nutrition. They can't explain it, but I can. I've been living on my own product because I believed in it, because I wanted to prove it worked, and it's been killing me."
Nala felt a cold weight settling in her chest. She thought about the past 6 months, the increasing pressure to work faster, the isolation, Stephanie's casual cruelty, and the reduction of her work to mere efficiency metrics. "You've been studying me," she said slowly. "The cameras, the timers, the pressure. You've been trying to figure out my methods so you could steal them." "Not steal, learn, replicate. I thought if I could just understand the process." "You can't understand this like it's an algorithm, Mr. Thorne." Her voice rose with anger she'd been suppressing for months. "This isn't code. It's not something you can break down into components and optimize. This is tradition. This is knowledge passed down through generations of black women who had to learn to make miracles out of scraps, who had to make do with the unwanted parts and turn them into something that sustained entire communities. You can't just take that. You can't reduce it to a formula." "I know that now." His voice broke completely. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how Stephanie treated you. I'm sorry for the surveillance and the pressure. I'm sorry for thinking I could commodify something sacred. But Nala," he looked at her with those desperate, dying eyes, "I'm 38 years old and I'm starving to death despite access to unlimited resources. And I've discovered that what I need, what everyone needs, isn't technological innovation. It's exactly what you've been trying to preserve." Nala stood in her grandmother's apron in the kitchen that had become her sanctuary, looking at this broken man who represented everything she'd been taught to be wary of: wealth without wisdom, innovation without intention, power without humility. But she also saw a human being in pain, a human being who'd been forced to confront his own mortality and found all his certainties crumbling. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," he admitted. I needed to tell you the truth. You deserved that much. And I needed," he gestured helplessly at the sink, at her dishes waiting to be washed. "I needed to do something humble, something real." And that's when Nala finally understood. The image that would haunt her for months, that would break her heart and rebuild it into something different. Cassian Thorne, billionaire and tech mogul, standing at her sink, washing her dishes with tears streaming down his face. Not to analyze them, not to study them, but to touch something authentic, to perform an act of service, to connect with the humility he'd spent years avoiding. "The water was still warm from when you washed them earlier, and I thought maybe if I could just touch something real, something made with actual care, maybe I could remember what it felt like to be human instead of an optimization algorithm." Nala felt her own tears starting, not from pity, but from the profound sadness of seeing someone realize they'd been lost for so long they'd forgotten what home looked like. "Mr. Thorne, Cassian, please. I think we're past formalities." "Cassian," she said gently, "those dishes aren't going to save you. You know that, right?" "I know, but I had to do something. I couldn't just... I've been taking and taking and taking for so long. I needed to give something back, even something small, even something that doesn't matter." "It matters," Nala said quietly. "Humility always matters." They stood there in silence, the healing broth simmering between them, a bridge between two worlds that had been set up as opposites were really just different aspects of the same human need to be nourished, sustained, loved. "I'm going to have to shut down Nutricor. Once the FDA sees the real data, once the lawsuits start, it's over. A $2 billion company built on a lie, and I deserve it." "Maybe, but that doesn't have to be the end of the story." He looked at her confused. "What if," she said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke, "what if we started something new, something that honored traditional methods instead of trying to replace them? What if we used your resources and my knowledge to create something that actually helps people? You'd work with me after everything I've done?" "I'd work with you because of what you just did." She gestured at the clean dishes, at his raw, red hands. "You humbled yourself. You told the truth. You asked for help. That's more than a lot of powerful men ever do." Cassian laughed weakly. "My board would call that weak. Your board is wrong about a lot of things." Nala ladled some of the healing broth into a bowl, pressed it into his hands. "Here, drink this, and then let's talk about what comes next." He drank, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than despair. He felt hope. The emergency board meeting, the real one, not the stalling session from before, happened exactly 3 weeks and 4 days after the night in the kitchen. Cassian stood before the same panel of investors, but this time Nala stood beside him, and this time he was ready to tell the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I owe you an apology and an explanation. Nutricore's products, as currently formulated, are inadequate. They're causing nutritional deficiencies in long-term users. The FDA investigation will bear this out, and we cannot continue operating under false pretenses." The room exploded. Victoria Chen's face went white, then red. Robert Fairchild stood up so fast his chair fell over. 3 board members started talking at once. "You've committed fraud," Victoria's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "You've been selling a defective product while telling us everything was fine." "I didn't know it was defective until you are the product," she jabbed a finger at him. "You've been using your own formulas, and you didn't notice you were dying?" "I noticed," Cassian said quietly, 3 months ago, and I've spent every day since trying to understand why our products were failing while simultaneously trying to cover it up because I was terrified of this moment, of admitting I was wrong, of losing everything I'd built." "So you're a fraud and a coward," Robert sneered. "Yes," Cassian agreed simply. "I am. I was. But I'm also standing here telling you the truth now because I've discovered something that matters more than my pride or this company's valuation." He nodded to Nala, who stepped forward. She'd been nervous about speaking to these titans of industry, but standing in that conference room, wearing her grandmother's apron over her professional clothes, she felt her grandmother's strength flowing through her. "My name is Nala Robertson," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I've been the production chef in Nutricore's basement kitchen for 6 months. Mr. Thorne discovered that my traditional cooking methods were correcting his nutritional deficiencies, where his own products were causing them. For the past 3 weeks, we've been working with independent nutritionists, food scientists, and medical researchers to understand why." She clicked a remote, bringing up a presentation on the screens. Traditional cooking methods, particularly those passed down through generations in communities that had to maximize nutrition from limited resources, create complex compounds that we're only beginning to understand. Fermentation produces beneficial bacteria. Slow simmering releases minerals from bones. Certain combinations of herbs and vegetables create enzymatic reactions that enhance bioavailability of nutrients. "This is pseudoscience," said Victoria coldly. "Grandmother's wisdom, folk medicine, it has no place in a technology company." "It's not pseudoscience," countered Dr. Sarah Kimura, who joined them via video from MIT. "It's science we're only recently developing tools to measure. The human microbiome research of the past decade has revealed that traditional food preparation methods from cultures around the world were producing effects we couldn't explain with previous analytical tools. What seemed like superstition was actually sophisticated empirical knowledge developed over thousands of years of trial and error." "Laughable," Robert Fairchild said derisively. "So you're suggesting we pivot from cutting-edge nutritional technology to, what, soul food? Home cooking? How exactly does that scale?" "It doesn't, not the way you're thinking. We can't mass-produce Nala's cooking and maintain its benefits. We tried. But what we can do is something different, something I was too arrogant to consider before." He advanced the presentation to show a new logo, Root and Remedy. "We're proposing a complete company transformation, not meal replacement shakes, but a network supporting traditional and sustainable food preparation. Educational programs teaching traditional cooking methods from diverse cultures. Microenterprises helping home cooks monetize their skills. Technology used not to replace cooking, but to connect people who know how to cook with people who need real food." "You're describing a charity," Victoria said flatly. "We invested in a high-margin tech company, and you want to turn it into a cooking school network?" "I'm describing a sustainable business model that actually helps people instead of harming them," Cassian countered. "And yes, the margins will be lower, the scaling will be slower, but it will be real." "This is insane," Robert was already gathering his things. "I'm calling my lawyers. You've breached every fiduciary duty." "We have orders," Nala's words quietly stopped him mid-motion. 462 orders in the past 2 weeks, from people who heard through social media that Mr. Thorne nearly died from his own product and was saved by traditional cooking. They want what we're offering: real food, real knowledge, real connection. She clicked to show testimonials, social media posts, messages from people tired of optimization and biohacking and technological solutions to problems that didn't exist. One woman wrote that she'd been on meal replacement shakes for a year and didn't realize she'd stopped tasting her food until she tried our first sample box. A man said his children didn't know what a real meal looked like until we sent them recipes from his grandmother's culture. People are hungry, not just for calories, but for meaning, for tradition, for connection to something older and deeper than the latest tech trend. Victoria Chen stood, and the room went silent. Everyone knew that where she went, the rest would follow.
She looked at Cassian for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You're absolutely right," she finally said. The room seemed to exhale collectively. "You're absolutely right that you committed fraud, right that you failed your fiduciary duty, right that you nearly destroyed this company through arrogance and cowardice. Panel, you're also right that there's something here worth saving. Not Nutricor as it was, but something different, something that might actually matter." She turned to the board. "Here's what's going to happen. Cassian is stepping down as CEO effective immediately. He'll remain as an advisor and minority stakeholder, but operational control goes to new leadership. Ms. Robertson," she looked at Nala, "how would you feel about becoming Chief Culinary Officer with full authority over all product development?" Nala's eyes widened. I'm not a business person. Neither was Cassian, apparently, Victoria said dryly. "But you understand the product in a way he never did. We'll surround you with operations people who can handle the business side, but the vision, the actual food and education components, that's yours to lead." "I accept," Nala said, her voice stronger now, "on one condition. 20% of the new company's shares are set aside for a foundation supporting traditional food knowledge preservation in marginalized communities. Black, indigenous, immigrant, all the communities whose culinary wisdom has been dismissed or appropriated without credit." "Done," Victoria smiled. A real smile, not her usual shark's grin. "Done. Anyone who objects can divest now." 2 board members stood and left. The rest stayed. Welcome to the food revolution, the real one.
If this story touched your heart, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another story about karma, justice, and the power of humility. Drop a comment. What would you do if you discovered your billion-dollar company was built on a lie? Would you have the courage to admit you were wrong? I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, real nourishment comes from the heart, not a formula. 6 months later, Root and Remedy launched officially. The headquarters had moved from Palo Alto's gleaming tech campus to a renovated warehouse in Oakland, just blocks from where Nala had grown up. The building held test kitchens, classrooms, and a commercial space where traditional cooks could rent time to produce their specialties for distribution. Cassian's health had stabilized. He'd never fully regained what his months on Nutricor had cost him. There were permanent effects, lessons literally written into his bones. But he was alive, present, and working harder than he ever had, not to optimize or scale or maximize, but simply to make something real and good. Stephanie Carr had been let go the day after the board meeting. She'd tried to sue for wrongful termination, but her own documented treatment of Nala and other staff had torpedoed her case. Last Nala heard, Stephanie was working at another startup, no doubt treating their staff with the same casual cruelty disguised as efficiency. The old Nutricor was indeed shut down by the FDA. Class action lawsuits were filed. Settlements were reached. Cassian had lost most of his personal fortune in the process, not just to settlements, but to funding the transition to Root and Remedy when most investors pulled out. But Robert Fairchild's prediction had been wrong. The business did scale, just not the way Silicon Valley typically measured scaling. Instead of one massive company, Root and Remedy had spawned a network of hundreds of small food enterprises run by traditional cooks from every culture imaginable. Grandmother's recipes were being preserved, documented, taught. Young people who'd never cooked were learning from elders. Elders who'd been dismissed as old-fashioned were being celebrated as knowledge holders. The margins were lower, the growth was slower, but it was sustainable, economically, environmentally, and culturally. Miguel now ran one of the micro-enterprises, selling his mother's Oaxacan recipes through the platform. Chen had moved into supply chain management, connecting traditional ingredient sources with cooks who needed them. Marcus's daughter had gotten a scholarship through the foundation and was studying food anthropology at Stanford. And one evening, as Nala was locking up the main kitchen, she found Cassian in the garden behind the building, the expanded version of her original plot, now growing dozens of heritage varieties. He was washing dishes again, but this time it was part of his regular volunteer shift. Every week he spent time washing dishes, prepping vegetables, doing the humble work that had saved his life by teaching him what he'd been missing. "Cassian," she called out. He looked up, smiled. He looked older than his 39 years, the price of his lessons visible in his still gaunt frame, but his eyes were clear, present, alive. "Just finishing up. Mrs. Chen's dumplings made a lot of dishes." "They always do." Nala came to stand beside him. "I've been thinking about something. That night I found you washing my dishes. You said you were trying to touch something real." "I remember. Did you ever figure out what you were really looking for?" Cassian was quiet for a moment, his hands still moving in the warm, soapy water. "I was looking for connection. Not networking or networking events or strategic partnerships, just real human connection. The kind that happens when you share a meal someone made with love, when you wash someone else's dishes because they fed you, when you acknowledge that you need other people. And that's not weakness, that's being human. He laughed softly. I built a company trying to eliminate the inefficiencies of cooking and eating together, trying to optimize away the time wasted on food preparation and communal meals. I was so focused on efficiency that I forgot why we eat together in the first place. It's not just about nutrition, it's about communion. My grandmother used to say that, Nala said quietly. Every meal is communion, a sharing of sustenance and spirit. That's why you can't rush it, why you can't optimize it, why love and intention matter. She was right, Cassian finished the last dish, dried his hands carefully. About everything, and I was wrong about everything. But the beautiful thing about being wrong is that it means you can learn, you can change, you can become something better than you were. They walked back through the gardens together, past raised beds where volunteers would come tomorrow to tend herbs and vegetables, past the classroom windows where next week's cooking course schedule was posted. Do you ever regret it? Cassian asked. The company you could have built if you'd gone into business for yourself, instead of helping me salvage something from the wreckage I created. Nala thought about it honestly. No, because this, Root and Remedy, the network, all of it, this is bigger than anything I could have built alone. And it needed someone who'd learned what you learned, someone who'd hit rock bottom and found humility there. Someone who could speak to other tech people, other optimizers, and say, here's what I lost by trying to improve on tradition. Here's what I found when I finally learned to listen. She smiled. Besides, I like working with you. You're useful for reaching tall shelves. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that had become more frequent as he'd healed. High praise from Chef Robertson. A car pulled up, Victoria Chen, coming for her weekly volunteer shift. She'd become one of Root and Remedy's most unexpected champions, investing not just money, but time into the project. Turns out the Dragon Lady of Sand Hill Road had learned to cook from her immigrant grandmother too, and spent decades trying to prove she was more than that heritage, before realizing it was exactly what made her powerful. You two standing around philosophizing again? She called out. We've got 100 meal kits to pack for tonight's distribution. Coming, they both answered. As they walked toward the light of the building, toward the work that would extend long into the night, Nala felt her grandmother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. This, she thought, is what you meant. This sharing, this preservation, this passing down of knowledge, not as something to be owned, but as something to be gifted forward. She'd started 6 months ago as just another employee in a tech company's basement kitchen, invisible and undervalued. She'd ended up helping transform not just a company, but a small piece of the world's understanding of what food could be and mean. And it all started with a billionaire washing her dishes, trying desperately to touch something real in a life that had become all illusion. Sometimes, Nala reflected, the universe teaches its lessons in the strangest ways. Sometimes karma isn't about punishment, it's about correction. About taking someone who's lost their way and showing them through pain and humility the path back home. Cassian had learned that lesson at an enormous cost, but he learned it. And in learning it, he helped create something that would outlast any tech company, any billion-dollar valuation, any Silicon Valley disruption. A reminder that some things, love, tradition, human connection, can't be optimized because they're already perfect.